Hey everybody, and welcome to the Rock and Roll Farming Podcast. And today I'm staying in Wales again, and I'm heading down south to Monmouthshire once again to speak to farmer Dan Smith. Dan, how are you?
I'm very good, thank you. Really good in the sunshine.
It is sunny, isn't it? I can't. It's been quite the year for the UK, hasn't it? Sunshine wise,
Yeah, no,
good,
we're
good
all
for
good,
making
thank you.
hay.
Yeah, exactly that.
Yeah, you are in Monmouthshire, but I think you've got even less of a Welsh accent than me. Are you a native of
Funny. I was actually born in Carmarthen. My parents were tenant farmers on a dairy farm in Carmarthenshire, where I was born, and then we left there when I was two. But I have a mum who was born in South America and a very English dad, and we then spent our time in England. So quite the variety.
Wow, hybrid vigor.
Exactly that. Exactly. Yeah, maybe. I'm not sure the results quite say that, but yeah,
All
there we
right. That's awesome. Where's your mum from in South America?
Chile.
No way. Didn't
Yeah.
know that. That's awesome. Have you ever
And
been?
now lives in Portugal because she hates the UK weather.
Have you ever been to Chile?
No, although it is on the plan. I avoided it on my Nuffield route, knowing that we can get a family trip there at some point with lots of people I've met, which would be pretty cool.
Oh, cool. So do you count yourself as Welsh or English or both?
European, which is controversial in this day and age, but I don't really count myself as anything for lots
Yeah,
of reasons. But yeah,
yeah. Cool.
yeah.
All right. So born in Carmarthenshire, they're all dairy farms down in Carmarthenshire, aren't they? But
Yeah.
your dad was a farm manager down there. How long were you down there?
Literally a couple of years, and then he had uh, various farm managers jobs around the UK. So I think the reason I don't really count myself as anything is because I lived in. By the time I was 21, I'd lived in 26 different houses. So
Oh, wow.
I'm a bit of a nomad. But
Wow.
we're changing that. We're deliberately changing that for our family. But that's yeah. My wife lived in pretty much the same house for her entire life. It's worlds clashing in that respect.
Yeah. Wow, that must have been, I don't know, pros and cons to that, I suppose. You met lots of people
Hard
and
to say, isn't it? I don't. Yeah, yeah, hard to say. I don't think you know when you're a kid, do you? And then
mm,
a bit of a wavy late teenage years, I guess, added to that. But also, I guess the reflection being that if we're trying to change that for our kids, then maybe there's something that I'd prefer it to be different. Maybe I don't know.
yeah, lots of different schools, I guess.
A lot of different schools, yeah, yeah.
Yeah. And
Which
not that's not a good thing for results
I
in
mean, it wasn't a
academia.
good thing for me, but whether that's because it was lots of different schools or whether I just didn't really understand what I was doing there for the majority of it, I don't know. Yeah, maybe consistency helps. Maybe I suspect so. But I yeah had loads. I think three or four primary schools. I had the same high school actually,
Yeah.
but I was done by that point. So I kind of yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, education at that time was not for me, I'm afraid.
No, but then as you're saying that, to be fair, I was in the same, just had one primary school and one secondary school, and it wasn't for me either. So,
Okay, fair.
I spent most of my time looking out of a window and yeah, just couldn't. I don't know the way. Well, it's still much the same really. I struggle to take in large chunks of
Sure,
information.
sure.
If someone's just talking at me for more than like 3 minutes,
Mhm.
they've lost me. So I kind
I
of
always say I never remember technicalities in a conversation, but I'll always remember the feel of a conversation. It's that
yeah,
technical stuff that gets me. And I know some technical stuff, but I've got to go back over it or actually like just be shown if I'm shown something in person
mm,
and I understand it, I'm like, yeah, that makes sense. But if you just told me or showed me a PowerPoint, I'm like, what's that bird doing outside?
I think a lot of us in farming are the same, aren't they? I think maybe teaching is different now. I've certainly seen that with my kids. I'm sure you've seen it with yours as well. It is a lot more hands-on now, isn't it? Rather than sit in your chair and shut up and listen.
Sure. And I think yeah, we basically decided we've actually sent our daughter to a Welsh speaking primary school to try and give her something that we can't give her. But essentially, I think certainly primary school, if kids are just really happy and they enjoy learning, which a lot of that just comes from playing and experimenting with your hands and all that sort of stuff, then you're more inclined to try and learn more and more.
I think
Whereas
so.
our era was very much just like, oh, write that down, and it's just well boring, quite frankly. It was more that I didn't see the purpose in it. I couldn't understand what I was there to do.
Hmm.
If that makes sense.
Yeah, no, I'd be much the same. I think kids are encouraged to be much more curious now, aren't they? And maybe difference is more encouraged now. I don't think
Yeah, for sure, for sure.
difference and
Although
diversity wasn't encouraged so much.
no, that's hard within the schooling system, but I think maybe teachers understand that a little bit more. But
Mm,
actually a hard thing to achieve for
yeah,
sure.
yeah, no, definitely. Okay. So uh growing up in all those different places and different farms, did it make you want to be a farmer or did it have the opposite effect at the time?
Um, I think without knowing it, the complete opposite effect. I wasn't inspired to be a farmer, although I loved all like the romantic bits. Like the my wife always laughs when I take the sheepdog out. I'll always take a shepherd's crook because like you do, right? There's all of those things that are, like making hay at the moment, the kind of
Yeah.
smell of the hay and the so yeah, all those romantic things. I think I spoke to my dad about this a bit actually. Maybe it comes from a sort of fundamental feeling that things weren't necessarily quite right in some of them really harsh um, sort of conventional systems.
Mm,
And I've since discovered through lots of opportunity, I guess, that my happiest place is on farms that are kind of really diverse, really nature rich. And I'm not saying that that's the way we should be farming necessarily, but that just happens to be where I'm at my happiest.
yeah.
I think being on some quite conventional farming systems, I probably didn't love it. But
Hmm.
then equally, going back to the school thing, by the time I left school, I had absolutely no idea what I wanted to do apart from I wanted to do what I wanted to do. That that was about it, which gets you in trouble when you leave school earlier than you should do and end up doing whatever you want to do for a few years. Um,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, so yeah, I absolutely wasn't inspired, certainly not to go to agricultural college or um, yeah, just hadn't even really considered it, to be honest with you. But then, as often these things happen, you kind of come back around, and I ended up doing groundworks for farms and helping out on farms, and that's kind of how I got back into it, I guess, in my early 20s.
Yeah. Okay. So that's what you spent your teen years doing, driving diggers.
Later, I spent my teen. We won't talk about what I spent my teen years doing, but the but after early 20s when I met Ellie and tried to sort myself out a bit, I guess driving diggers, a lot of time in the Cotswolds on big estates, and that was it was an agricultural world that I was in, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah. The Cotswolds. Whereabouts?
So in between Cirencester and Cheltenham was home for us,
Right. Okay.
which is beautiful. It's a stunning part of the world, full of lots of great people.
Yeah, and launched even more into the spotlight in recent times, well, obviously with Clarkson's farm.
Yeah, I actually I spent time on a game farm on the farm next door to that, so I know it pretty well.
Yeah, it's yeah, interesting part of the world down there, isn't it? I guess I always find the Cotswolds fascinating because I would have like giving you a very boring history lesson. One of my great grandmothers was from the Cotswolds, a place called Loughborough, which is between Morton on the Marsh and
Yeah, I know
Sandwell.
it. I know it well, yeah.
Yeah, and they were her family were all kind of coachmen and gardeners at one of the big houses down there. You know, all very much downstairs people that you won't
Yeah,
be in the old parlance. You won't be supposed to learn, but of course then it would have been very poor rural area apart from
sure.
the big houses. But now you go there and they call in occasionally, and because a couple of my great uncle's names are on the war memorial on the village green, and I call in occasionally to pay my respects and. You know, it's all Ferraris and Lamborghinis and
For sure.
Porsches.
And actually, I was very lucky because I was definitely one of those peasants, but I guess I was respected and liked enough that I was let into the other world quite a lot as well, which was great. And actually, a lot of we often talked about trying to go back, but trying to afford anything there is actually sort of impossible, really,
Mm.
unless you can afford a Ferrari. you know, yeah,
Yeah, that's rural housing shortages are a whole other podcast. But
Yeah, sure, sure.
yeah. So what was your first route back into farming properly then?
Yeah, so I got I've been doing bits and bobs of farming, and I got offered the opportunity to uh run a charity farm down in Monmouth, which is what borders back down here. So manage a charity farm, and actually, because of that kind of shaped my journey a bit further because I had the opportunity to kind of investigate the kind of farming I wanted to do, and I was very lucky that I had access to um, mates, I'd call them because they are mates, but some pretty sort of influential or certainly good thinkers within the kind of regen world, if you want to, for want of a better word. Um, yeah, so I was kind of inspired into this potentially slightly new way of farming, or if again, if you want to call it that. But so yeah, I was very inspired at that point, and that my I'm at my best when I'm sort of helping people. I know that about myself now. And as I say, the kind of health of the land and the environment, I'm really interested in that. And I guess some of these farmers showed me that way. So then when we did that for nearly 10 years just before we moved here. So yeah, we ran the farm in Monmouth, which was great.
So that was there's quite a lot. There was quite a lot in that answer, but that was that were those realizations about yourself and what you're good at and what you like, was that a gradual thing, or was it like once you once you took that first bucket?
Really gradual thing. Really gradual thing. I think again, there's some things you know about yourself without really knowing them.
Mm,
Does that make sense?
yeah, it does.
And actually, it hasn't really been until quite recently, in my very grateful for it, the opportunity to travel around the world and kind of investigate these things. It's only now that some of those things have really been cemented, and I'm still sort of toying what we do with that information and kind of you know what we do. I'm just about to turn 40, like actually this week. What we do with the kind of next chapter, and that throws up some quite a lot of ideas. But yeah, that some of this thinking has really only been cemented in the last year. Until then, I was just kind of doing it and knew it was a good thing. Like I loved working with the kids, and um, that was such like an immersive learning experience for me. And seemingly I was quite good at it, but also a lot of my sort of maybe a little bit of my misspent youth times added into that, a bit of
Mhm.
relatability. Um, but also the farming stuff and like just learning and pushing some of those ideas. It's kind of got us to where we've got to. It's just what we do with all that now, I guess.
Yeah. So the charity run and the kids, let's just go a little bit deeper into that. That were kids from different
So
backgrounds, the
mostly
kind of kids who've never been on farms.
city backgrounds, very much never been on farms, very disconnected with food and at risk of being expelled from school, behavioural issues. Some had already been expelled. The stuff I particularly loved was with the unaccompanied asylum-seeking children from, all around the world: Eritrea, Congo, Syria, like everywhere you can sort of
Wow.
think of. And it just opened my eyes to so many things. And actually, I think the biggest skill it taught me was um, it slightly honed my emotional intelligence and my
Mm.
ability to kind of read situations. And I always say to people, if you want to learn how to have difficult conversations, get 12 teenagers from the middle of London together and stick them on a farm and tell them you're going to tell you that they're not allowed to have their phones or any of their own food. You start to, you start to work some of these things out pretty quickly.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, so loads of skills like that, but more. I feel very privileged that I was allowed, because it was therapy based and we were having a lot of good conversations, good wholesome conversations. I feel very privileged that I was allowed a window into so many lives that
Mm.
many people would never have that chance to see. And I learned way more off them than they would have ever learned off me, I'm sure. In my kind of building of empathy for different demographics and different situations. And it's definitely helped me in how now I make every decision,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah.
And
No.
certainly now as a dad, that I that is You know, Ellie and I, we have our sort of values and beliefs written down, and we try to we have a holistic planning. We've developed all of those things because of the impact that we want to have broader, and also like on our own family. And some of the really quite horrific things that I spoke to kids about that maybe happened to them or others around them, like it does give you a slightly different pragmatic view on some stuff, I think.
Yeah, I bet it does. Because I mean, I guess um, those of us, I don't, as you know, Dan, I don't like stereotypes. But for those of us who are born and brought up in rural communities, we tend to, especially where, I mean, I don't know, the first 20 years of my life, I'd barely been off the farm, and I probably didn't speak to anyone who wasn't from a Welsh farming community. So you can get very much in a bubble, can't you? And
For sure.
I suppose for you, meeting kids from those kind of backgrounds and all around the world, and some of them must have had incredibly difficult upbringings and journeys to that point. Um, I, I can't even imagine when I was, dealing if I'd have been put in that situation to speak to those kids. So I guess it must have been, yeah, an incredible privilege, but also I guess quite challenging at times, certainly to start with until you got used to it, was it?
Actually, yeah, I think actually the latter end was probably the most challenging,
Okay.
which I can sort of explain a bit. But you're right. I mean, I hadn't been on I didn't go on a plane till I was 16. You know, lived a
Yeah.
very sort of hand to mouth, I guess. Lots and but not experienced any of these kind of things,
No.
and you know they're their stories to tell, so I'm not going to share them. But some of the kind of, if you could imagine the kind of the worst of the worst things you'd ever happen to
Yeah.
children, it was those kind of things.
Yeah.
And I was fully flung into that with support. You know, I worked with an amazing team of people and therapists and all of these things, and it's a brilliant program, brilliant charity. um, but for me, it was all about, I was so immersed in it, it sort of became my identity to some degree.
Mm.
And I loved it. I loved the getting the kids on the farm on the Monday, seeing them leave on the Friday, be considerably better, knowing that I was a contributing factor to that, and knowing that, could seeing how like wholesome farming was, and eating really good food, eating as a family, all of those things that we experience, or should or generally experience on a really good healthy family farm.
Yeah.
You know, so I knew the feeling that we were creating. But actually the bit that probably got me in the end, and I still haven't sort of entirely come to terms with it, but and I don't mind talking about it with you guys, because I know that you're very open with your kind of mental health. But after 7 years, 6.5, 7 years, um, I was became to be at my lowest.
Mm.
And I think I'd underestimated how much of that I'd actually taken on. I was always had I was doing that work, but also had that ridiculous farmer attitude of like, we're just going to crack on, head down. Like there was lots of support offered, I didn't always take it.
Mm.
Um, and yeah, I think a few other things happened, and I think it basically suddenly hit me that I'd taken on all. And you know,
Mm.
I could tell you conversations I had with individual kids from 6 years ago that impacted me, and I could tell you probably 500 of those.
Yeah.
You know, it's quite hard for the. And then I suddenly had this realization that I was quite heavy with the weight of a lot of that sort of stuff.
Mm.
Um, so yes, there was a toll, but as I say, I think it came out in the latter, and it kind of blindsided me a little bit, probably.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, I can understand that because you're a very empathetic person. So I mean, I found this. I mean, we talked a few minutes ago about it's as you know, with a lot of the stuff I've done, um, it's taken me a long time to get there. So I feel like I'm only just getting started as I'm in my
Mm,
40s, if you like, with a
mm,
lot of the stuff I do. And also it's taken me a long time to realize some things about myself, what I'm good at, what I'm not so good at. And I know if I was in that place, I'd have been exactly the same because I do have a habit. Well, I think it's probably a good thing in a way, but I also it can take a personal toll in that I do tend to take on the woes of the world,
Hmm.
and that's something I have to. And that's, as I say, it can be a good thing, but it can also. There's a balance. You've got to be careful with it, I think.
And I think you've got to have that knowledge of yourself. And actually, I
Yeah.
think one of the things that tripped me up was that I really did think I thought that I had that knowledge of myself, and I thought I was protecting myself.
Yeah.
Um, and it wasn't until things went a bit wobbly for other reasons that that sort of all fell apart to some degree.
Mm,
And I know others around me could see it, and actually, loads of people were amazing at the time, and I'm very thankful for that. Um, but I was still probably in a bit of denial for a while because all I wanted to do was kind of help these young people. And, we had weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks of kids booked in. And I knew all that. Like we were booked up a year in advance. And I felt like so responsible for them coming to the
mm,
farm, knowing that I could have an impact on them, that I still sort of carried on regardless.
mm.
And then you get the kind of compounding issue. And yeah, yeah.
What I mean, a lot of people open up their farms to school visits and
Mhm.
um children now. We've just opened Farm Sunday was not very long ago, and I think a lot of farmers have kind of changed their mindset on that in recent years. A lot of people are really encouraging people to come on farms and open up and ask questions. And I guess the majority of those visitors won't have been on a farm before. What advice would you give to someone who's maybe looking to do that in terms of, I don't know,
Yeah,
how to speak to people, how to
love it.
communicate?
I love it. And actually, I think luckily in my consultancy I'm doing a little bit of this for various people at the moment, but the kids love, like, they love passion for a start.
Mm,
They love messing about in the most simplest of tasks that we wouldn't even give credit to, but what they mostly like is integrity.
mm,
Not not so much younger kids will pick up on it, but teenage kids, if you're like lying to them,
mm.
or if you're sort of making stuff up, I promise you they'll know
Yeah.
before you've even said it. That's what they're doing in life.
Mm,
They're like looking for these opportunities to question things, and to, and they will work that out. Just show them real life. Be honest with them. Um, the other thing I'd say is, like, make it a success. The simplest of tasks for us, like fixing a water trough or moving sheep, or kind of like get them involved. That they're the bits that they'll remember. The kind of the beginning of this is actually quite a difficult thing, and I do this as a farmer, but it's quite a task. Get them involved in the middle, and then the success at the end, and like the celebration of that end, is because we do it every day. We just don't
mm,
realize how fun some of our work is, and doing that in a like beautiful environment surrounded by sort of good nurture, and that tends to come on farming in the whole, in how you communicate. It's actually really quite a simple recipe, I think.
yeah.
I think we get stuck in the trap of like trying to tell kids what to do. Does that make sense? Whereas
Yeah.
actually getting them to lead the way and show us and be involved, and how would you do this? That they'll grow quicker in that time than they will if we just stand there and tell them this is what we do.
Yeah. No, absolutely agree. And as someone who's, yeah, got a couple of teenagers and soon to have a third teenager in my household, I think a lot about that kind of stuff. Yes. Yeah. Um, but yeah, I guess ultimately though, you must look back on that time with a great deal of fondness because, whatever you do and go on to do it in the rest of your life, you helped an awful lot of kids, and
Sure,
that's
sure. And yeah,
you
as I
know.
say, I feel very privileged. I can have the conversations now because of that, and I know lots of amazing people because of it, and had lots of
Mm,
opportunity. And yeah, it's definitely shaped what do we do to some degree. This sounds quite a harsh comment, but I described it to a couple of people as I feel like I've slightly served my debt,
hmm
which doesn't mean that I don't want to continue to help people in other ways,
mm,
but actually I kind of feel like I've done that, and
yeah.
I can park it, if that makes sense.
Yeah. No, I can understand that. So where did the initial interest in the environment and nature come from? Because I feel like from what we've talked about so far, you're probably a bit like me, and correct me if I'm wrong, spent at least the first half of your life living in beautiful areas, but not really appreciating
For
your
sure.
surroundings.
Yeah, for sure. And again, there may be some complacency around that, but I guess from that, my dad was always very interested in nature. We
Mm,
played a lot outside in like beautiful woodlands on big old estates, um, and actually so essentially when I'd left school, I'd never read a book because books are boring, right? And then I think when I got to like 18, 19, I started reading, and they were the most relatable thing that I was interested in was like nature books, and
interesting, right?
and actually there was one point I say one point, it probably lasted for about 6 7 years, where I was reading a book a week. I went from not being bothered about anything like that to really realizing that there's this whole kind of world out there that I hadn't learned anything about,
Yeah.
and I was just like reading, and they were mostly sort of natural history or kind of autobiographies of people who have been involved in it, or um, yeah. So I guess from there, and as I say, I'm at my happiest when I'm in enriched environments. I'm not
Mm,
particularly happy in big crowds. It's not really my thing. Um, and I can now take my kids out into the countryside, or other people actually, and kind of not educate them, but just be with them in that scenario is great. Yeah.
yeah. And good for your mental health too, being in that space.
For sure. Although not currently doing enough of it, but yeah, for sure. That, as I say, that's when I am.
Yeah.
I describe it to people. 5 o'clock where it's dark in the morning, 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning when it's dark in a woodland when there's no one else around.
Mm,
That is my like best place for sure.
yeah. It's yeah, especially at this time of year.
Yeah,
It's
sure.
gorgeous, isn't it? All
Yeah.
right. So, how did you start to um connect nature and the environment with the way you wanted to farm or the way you were farming, or when did you start to, I don't
Yeah.
know, when did it click and when did you
Yeah,
start
really
to
good
think,
question. So the budgeting, the charity was separate. The farm had very separate budgets, and it was
yeah,
where we were on was a small hectareage um, livestock farm, but hill pretty poor. So it was kind of a way, and of it was kind of a way of making money, to be honest with you, making the budgets work, but also what interested me and what I could see interested the children. So we took on stuff with like the Wildlife Trust and the National Trust. And then we started messing about with bale grazing and all of these kind of to really enrich the environment, because everything was about trying to give these young people the best opportunities and kind of see nature. So I wanted to like really like super speed that, I
mm,
guess. And as coming back to what I said earlier about the people who inspired me, all of their farms sort of felt like this. And
mm,
I was lucky enough to then sort of go around and just pick bits that I wanted to try and pick bits that I wanted to do. And yeah, go to places like Groundswell or wherever it happened to be, and really kind of push some of these concepts in my head and on the farm.
what were some of your biggest wins in that regard in terms of trying some of those things?
Uh,
Was there anything that was just, I don't know, just worked straight away?
I mean, the herbal lay systems changed our, mob grazing herbal lay system completely changed the system in terms of output. I got really interested in the agroforestry stuff, um, in terms of reclaiming old woodland. Everyone talks of agroforestry like it's a new thing, but actually we were doing a lot of reclaiming ancient woodland through grazing. That kind of ticked both boxes for me, I guess. Um, Put a lot of fencing in, put a lot of hedging in, and they were all wins because they were stuff that I could do with young people, but also having really good environmental benefits.
Hmm.
And then what I discovered is when you start doing things like that, you all of a sudden get the community on board, and then you kind of so there's kind of this whole ripple effect to some of this stuff. And then you get asked to go on podcasts or whatever it happens to be. There's this kind of ripple effect, and it's cool. It's cool. I think often the bit and maybe I'm a bit hypersensitive to it, but a lot of the stuff we miss in this is the human element. You
Yeah.
know, I always say to people in my consultancy role, I can tell you how to establish a herbal ley. We can design an agroforestry system. But if you're not passionate about it, or if your staff aren't bothered, or your community think that it's a waste of time, that's where you'll find your issues.
Yeah.
So yeah, it definitely honed my ears to some of that sort of stuff, I guess.
Yeah, it can help with yeah, I've talked about this before, but loneliness, I've talked about it on the podcast recently as well. Loneliness is such a big issue and
Mm.
with the farming community. People are just on their own a lot, aren't they? But
Mm-hmm.
I think that kind of community and the people who are doing these things that is central to it, isn't it? That they are that community, that word is part
Yeah,
of
and
it, isn't it?
actually, again, it took me a long time to realize this. I was trying to really work out, and that was an issue for me here because in the beginning, 10 years ago, we were talking about regenerative farming, and I kind of understood what it meant. Now
Mm,
I don't for
mm,
lots of reasons. Um, but I guess if we use that term to put some people under, um, it took me a long time to work it out, but it was a real lack of ego.
mm,
That's the thing that now I realize that I loved about it. It was the lack of ego in amongst it, and the kind of people prepared to help each other and explain things, and actually often say that they were wrong about something, which is quite,
yeah.
I would say, unusual in the farming world. Although not, I think that's probably getting better. And it's exactly why. So what we're trying to, so we've taken on this new farm, and that loneliness thing, I think, is a real big contributing factor to kind of mental health in farming.
Mm,
And so we're deliberately here trying to kind of build a business based community, which is often affiliated with these kind of slightly whimsical bankrolled projects, which we're absolutely not. So it's kind of how to make that a little bit more real and a bit scalable, probably.
yeah. Okay. Tell me about the fun where you are now then.
Yeah, very
And how it came about? How did you end up there?
Yeah. Yeah, super lucky that it actually probably came from my like of helping other people. And I do these things occasionally where I see something and I'm like, actually, I probably could add a bit of value there. Um, and what happened was, I don't know, 3 years ago, there's a state local to us which I'd known about called Dingerstow, and they go under Oldlands. Um, and I saw they advertised on Instagram that they had a farm to let for a regenerative farmer. And that there was going to be a package designed around that and a management plan and blah, blah, blah. Anyway, I just emailed them and said, look, I'm local. I know the estate. If at any point you need any help to find a tenant, like no charge, I'm really passionate about this in our local area. It's exciting to see a neighbouring estate is considering doing something different. Then I'll help you out.
Mm,
So I helped them a little bit with that process and got to know them. They sort of already knew of me, which was quite nice. And uh, then yeah, so that happened, and there's an amazing tenant in on there as a result of it. Sarah Dusgate, which lots of you all know, she's pretty cool, 30-year-old doing it on her own, taking a tenancy on her own on 200 acres, grazing cattle, and she's wicked. And then anyway, fast forward, and I was having a wobbly time at work. I'd been given a Nuffield. I'd been offered another couple of jobs, but I didn't have any clarity on anything. And very kindly, the estate contacted me and said, look, we've got a farm here. If you want it, we'll give you 6 months to think about it before we consider advertising it and see what you think. And I remember putting down the phone and saying to Ellie, I was like, well, that's really nice. We've just been offered a farm, and but I don't think it's really for us for no reason actually. And none of the because I was in a pretty poor state, none of that opportunity had registered. Does that
mm,
make sense? I kind
yeah.
of, the fact that people are really, really want farms, and that and it's really hard to get a farm,
Yeah.
that hadn't kind of really registered. Anyway, after a week, he was like, well, we're probably going to be homeless soon because the house came with my previous job, and we know we can do farming, we know we can make the farm pay, and we know we can do lots of other cool stuff. So why don't we do it? And that's kind of what happened. So we said, yeah, okay, let's take this on, let's try it. And So now we've ended up in an incredibly beautiful farmhouse, which uh, I'll tell you something in a minute, which I think is quite amusing. And a lovely place for 15 years to bring our children up, which is really a big part of what we're trying to do. Gives us a base that some of my consultancy stuff isn't complete nonsense, because hopefully people could be able to come here and see it, and also a place where we can give others opportunity, which is something that we're like super passionate about. So it's worked out really well. And if I'm honest with you, it's still entirely surreal, and it's still driving up the drive or meeting the neighbours. We're not, it's a pretty epic farm, and it's
Mm.
hard to sometimes realize that we're actually here and doing all of those things that we said we always wanted to do. Coming back to a conversation we had when we got married of if we won the lottery, what we'd redo, and the answer was we'd have a farm and bring up a family. Quite simple things, but that's kind of what we've achieved. And yeah, in we're having events on farms and engaging with people and the landlords are fully in support of it. I'm incredibly lucky that one half is a very well respected grassland ecologist, so I'm learning loads. I'm telling him about soil for what I know, and it's a really cool, healthy environment that starts with a kind of collaborative approach, and again, that's quite unusual, I think.
Awesome. And 15 years, you said. So
Yeah,
that's it.
15 year
That's not
tenancy.
not that common really
No,
anymore.
no, and probably wouldn't have done it for anything less. But again, that's
Yeah.
that conversation that you can have with forward-thinking landlords.
Yeah.
You're 5 years on a farm before you've even learnt the farm, I think,
You
probably.
certainly are. Yeah.
And
At least. Yeah.
yeah, at least,
Mm.
and these 3 5 year FBTs, I just I don't think that they're helping anyone, to
No,
be
I don't
honest with
either.
you.
No.
Yeah.
No, I don't either. So I mean, that just sort of ticks every box for you, doesn't it? Really, in terms of environment, ecology, you've been able to
Hmm.
help people, you've been able to bring your family up in a beautiful place. It's kind of yeah, everything you wanted, isn't it? It's funny how life can, I
Yeah,
don't
for
know,
sure.
suddenly do a 360, isn't it?
Yeah, for sure. And again, I still haven't quite realized that.
Mm,
Everyone keeps on telling me I'm very busy. I say I change that to say I've got momentum.
yeah.
Which I'm not sure which is the truth, but actually it does mean that quite a lot of my time is not on the farm. And that will change over time, but it's also, we're having these conversations around like what is enough. It's all right, well, being very busy and sort of maybe making money in this area, but if that's distracting what we're doing with our children or with the
Mm,
farm, you know which is better, what is wealth, what is richness, and like we've got 15 years to nail this. So actually, what do we do, and how important is time? I'm very aware we've got a 5 year old and a 3 year old. They're changing weekly, and that's really highlighted when you go away for a month for Nuffield. That's super highlighted. So yeah, we're still coming working some of this stuff out, and um, I have had a very, very clear sense of purpose previously for the last 10 years. And I think I've probably lost that a little bit. And that maybe comes from doing so many things. And it's just, yeah, it's work. I've got to get that back to be really satisfied. It's just working out how and we do that as a family.
yeah. So what does the farm look like now in terms of crops, livestock? How does it?
Yeah, yeah. So it was a dairy farm for a long time. So there's quite a lot of ryegrass clover lays, old ones, but still could be quite productive. We got a beautiful. The reason I said about the house is because I had a realization when I was traveling in New Zealand and people were telling me about their farms. I just off the cuff, because I was thinking about it. I said, "Do you know that my house is more than twice as old as farming in New Zealand?" Which is quite a kind of, so anyway, yeah, the house is 1642, grade
Is it?
two
Wow.
star listed. It's stunning, it's beautiful. Lots of buildings, although some of them would be considered modern agricultural buildings. That's a loose term now, I think. We've got cubicle sheds and things like that,
Yeah.
but also some really stunning barns, and a couple of which, well, one's going to have a wood turner in, and the other one we've done as this event space. We've got 100 acres of spring wheat in on a wild farm contract, which is quite fun. And some beautiful ancient woodlands, some new plantations. We've got some rare breed sheep. They were cattle are my thing, but they were actually down with TB just before we took
Okay.
the farm on, so we haven't done anything there. And actually, quite amusingly, everyone in farming is like, "Yeah, sheep and cows are great. You should get into that." And I'm like, "Well, yeah, sheep and cows are great if you've got 200 of them. It's not so great if you're trying to buy 200 of them at the moment."
Not at the moment, no.
No. So we're slightly waiting, maybe slightly paying that market, and I do think it might change with some of the subsidy stuff.
Yeah.
So we're aware we've got 15 years, but we're also not in a rush to lose loads of money. We're trying to do risk. I think the less risk we put into it, the more options we have,
Hmm.
basically.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
yeah, that's kind of where we're at.
Okay. So, you've mentioned your Nuffield scholarship a few
Mm.
times. I inevitably end up talking to Nuffield scholars on the podcast. I feel like Nuffield should give me money. I'm always sort of promote. I feel like I'm promoting Nuffield for free, but inevitably, people who do Nuffields are, well, always interesting because they've got an interesting story because they're either doing the Nuffield on something really cool and interesting and fascinating, or they have some kind of mad life experience on
Hmm.
the journey. So,
Fair. Yeah,
so
fair.
tell me about it from the beginning. Is it something you always wanted to do, or something you kind of fell into?
Interesting, actually. Yeah, I wouldn't have been aware of it certainly when I was growing up, and even 10 years ago, I wouldn't have been aware of it.
Mm,
But going back to the stuff I was doing with the kids, I had a really clear, and I could tell you exactly where I was standing. I had a really clear moment where we talked about integrity earlier.
yeah.
I had a really clear moment where I realized I was being a massive hypocrite, because we had these kids coming to the farm, and I was telling them basically that they could do whatever they wanted to do and they could be whatever they wanted to be. And I was like, what a loser. Like, you've been doing this for years and you haven't done any of that for yourself. You have no
Mm,
education. You flunked out of school, whatnot. Like, and so in that moment, I basically just decided to change that, probably because of that integrity thing, and
mm,
that's how we like to live. So actually, it was a journey to get there. Um, I found out about it and thought, yeah, that sounds like a good thing, but absolutely didn't have the confidence to do it. And then the really cool thing about it, all of these things, is to some degree they're available to everyone, and this is what I want the kind of message to be to people. Um, the first thing I applied for was the OFC in Inspire, and that was the kind of start of my networking.
hmm
When you don't go to uni and stuff, you don't really have a network. Is that fair? You might
Yeah.
have of local farmers and stuff, but a lot of people get that at uni.
Yeah.
So I did the OFC Inspire thing, which was amazing and opened my eyes to loads of things, and also gave me the beginnings of a network. Then I did the Worshipful Company of Farmers Challenge of Rural Leadership course, and off the back of that, have like the most amazing network that I could ever wish for. Of I spoke to a couple of them at the weekend actually, but like people that I don't still wouldn't even consider myself like sort of able to sit in the same room as, in their sort of standing in the industry or what they know, or um yeah, certainly wouldn't feel worthy of their company. Although interestingly, through my time when I was particularly low, it was some of those guys that helped me the most, which is
Yeah.
quite a kind of a side effect, I guess, of these things. Um, and then I just applied for Nuffield, completely thinking that I wasn't going to get it, because why would I? Um, and it's quite an in-depth process. Even like asking people to be a reference for you for something like that when when you're just a farmer from Wales, right?
Yeah.
Um, and that's not knocking farmers in Wales, but that that's kind of what I felt like. I was like,
Mm.
oh, like not worthy of doing any of these things to some degree. And then yeah, went to the interview in London, and then the letter arrived that I got it, which is all again a bit surreal, a bit kind of, and it felt like a really big thing, and it absolutely is a really big thing. Um, but I'm not sure I fully appreciate the whole thing again until I really started doing my travel. And I'd never been hadn't been outside of Europe until I jumped on a plane to go and meet all the other scholars from around the world in Brazil.
Yeah.
So if we talk about like kind of immersive experiences that are out of your comfort zone, and you walk into a room with like 100 other scholars, you don't think you're sort of worthy enough to be there amongst the 20 of you in London, and then there's 100 of these like really amazing people from all over the world,
Yeah.
um, and it's intense because a lot of them are incredibly high achieving, incredibly intelligent, and you're going to kind of battle your way through some of that. But entirely epic. The I've got friends all over the world now.
Yeah.
And so from the OFC Inspire in 2023, which is when I decided I needed to change up,
Yeah.
I've now spend a month in Brazil, a month in Canada, a month in New Zealand, and I have genuine friends like all over the world, which is insane. And I
Yeah.
know way, 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 way more now than I started.
Yeah.
Although interestingly, I also think I know less. I think I certainly have more questions for sure,
Yeah.
which doesn't always help. But yeah, what an amazing opportunity! And coming back to what I said in the beginning, these things within the bound set in them, they're kind of open to everyone. And I like to think that maybe I'm slightly slightly proof of that to some degree. You've just got to decide to do it if that's your thing, you know.
Yeah, I guess you and I've got that, and I'm kind of smiling and nodding throughout them because I very much relate to those feelings, and we've talked about this before. But I've talked about my gigantic imposter syndrome
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I'm getting better at dealing with. But yeah, some of the things I've done in recent years and the rooms I've been in, I always have to battle that feeling of
Sure.
I don't belong here. That everyone else
Yeah.
is. But I'm getting there, and the more you do it, and the more you meet those people, and you realize that everybody's suffering with that to a certain
Sure.
degree.
And it was actually you that introduced me to that concept. You wouldn't
Yeah.
have known that, but on the sort of OFC thing, it was you that introduced me to the concept of that. And actually, there's been a couple of times where I've described it as having prescribed imposter syndrome in a
Mm,
scenario where you're expected to be university educated, and I quite like to challenge that sometimes.
mm,
Um, but equally, I don't think it goes away. I just think that you see the relevance in challenging it.
yeah.
That's certainly where I
Yeah.
am. I see the relevance in challenging it, basically.
Yeah. I totally agree. So what was the title of your Nuffield?
Very loose. It's called Generation Regeneration. I was very focused at the time. It's the clashing of the world that I was in. Seeing kids from all over the world who I thought could be in a real addition to the UK farming industry. There's these kids. I'm working with lone migrant children, unaccompanied asylum seeking children that are kind of get a pretty bad rep in the UK. Yet they were coming to the farm and like doing amazing things because they're I believe inherently more related to what was happening on the land in compared to a lot of the children that we would have visit typically.
Yeah.
um, and regenerative farming, and I absolutely could see that a lot of city children were talking about environmental stuff and were really inspired to see environmental stuff more than they were farming stuff. And I think that they really understood this whole concept of climate change and climate crisis and wanted to do something about it. So that's what the title was. Interestingly, it has changed quite a lot since then. I've definitely learned that I like solutions, not problems. So it's kind of moved to slightly more where is it being successful in terms of university, college, or new apprenticeship schemes, internships, school leaver, kind of how do we capture them? Um, and yeah, that's allowed me to go around and see like these amazing things all over all over the world, which to some degree is what we're trying to bring back here. Um, but still with that focus on, I I really believe that our industry needs more diversity. I think often we talk about these concepts and pretend that we understand them and we don't. And until we get that on farm and start challenging some of these like ridiculous things that we see within the industry, like it's not going to change. For me, to some degree, it's just having that conversation and getting people, even the people that we're inviting here. We haven't deliberately done it, but I think the fact that because we're open to the concept, the people that we're getting here working the land are like pretty diverse, and that's pretty cool. And when we have groups of various stakeholders on the farm, they can see it. So you don't have to have that conversation about just the
Mm.
concept of it.
Yeah. How do we get better as an industry at recruiting people from diverse backgrounds? Because you know, I have this conversation all the time, but I feel like we're so good at kind of preaching to the converted. How do we appeal to people who don't
Yeah,
know much about
it's
farming? Because
it's hard because you do get that. The only places where you seem to get it naturally that I've seen is where the economics of it really stack up.
mm,
People who want to graft and see opportunity, they have a world of industries
mm,
that they can choose from. So where it's being really profitable, let's say, or there's really clear opportunity, people go into it by default, and certainly from who have not grown up in farming because they can see the opportunity. Um, Other than that, and this is what we're trying to achieve, I just think we've got to get as many different people on farms as we can and have the conversations and make it believable,
mm,
make it an option rather than just talk about it as an option. And I think we often get in that trap, and it comes from a really good place of trying to like do good stuff. But until we make it happen as an industry, then people can't see it to believe it. The other thing is, and I don't care what people say, I'm very confident in this. I've seen racism, sexism, homophobia, all of the isms, ageisms, all over the world. And I know I've been focusing on farming, but I feel it and see it more in farming and more in the rural communities than I do anywhere else. And
hmm
if I'm really honest, I'm not like, I'm not an extremist on these things. I just don't think there's any need for it. I
yeah,
don't understand why it's part of our culture, and certainly
yeah,
why it's an okay part of our culture to be proud of.
mm,
And I know that people do it because they might not be so worldly kind of thinking, or they do it because it's funny with their mates, or you know. But I don't think what they understand is actually the knock-on effect of that. Um, and it has, just as a kind of an example of that. So I interviewed or surveyed 500 young people for my Nuffield on their barriers to entering farming,
mm,
and not they were. It's quite interesting the kind of picture of what they believe a farmer to be, but actually they're the number one named thing was they get their information through social media. That's how it happened. The
yeah,
number one main thing of why they wouldn't be a farmer was because of white angry farmers shouting on
yeah,
social media about how terrible farming it is. And I don't think those people doing it
yeah,
are necessarily doing it because they want to have that impression.
mm,
They're doing it for whatever reason, and I'm still undecided because actually I think it's quite individual depending on who
mm,
that person is. Um, but that is out of 500 kids, which is not loads, but it's quite broad.
mm.
That came up time and time and time again, and it's pretty tragic if that is the truth of the situation. Why we're not encouraging these young people in.
Yeah, I'm not even surprised by that because those people put me off wanting to be a farmer.
Sure, yeah.
Sort of angry men shouting into cameras doesn't make me feel proud of our industry. So,
No.
And I
you
know,
know, that's hard to say. I think they're doing it because they believe it's the right thing to do. That's what I
yeah,
hope. But
yeah,
again, the knock-on effect. So when we're that's a clear example. So when we're doing things like being racist in a pub with our mates, because that's what we do at Young Farmers, and there happens to be other people in the room, or a kind of, you know, really small things like that,
mm,
I do believe have quite a big knock-on effect.
mm.
And I just think we need to clean it up a bit for the good of the industry, you know.
Yeah, I totally agree. It's always, and I know there's been some very good journalists in farming have written about this problem, and you see some of the reaction that they get just from writing about it and trying to open up. I think as an industry, we're often just super defensive, and I kind of understand why, because a lot of people feel like they're constantly under attack. But I don't think it's helpful when people react like that when people
No.
are just trying to open up a conversation.
And I think I'd be more okay with it if I was seeing it changing. You know,
Mm,
you can see cultures change and develop, and
you can.
but I'm not sure I'm seeing that.
No.
And so I think to your question of how do we get more, we're kind of butting heads on some of this stuff,
Mm,
and it's not particularly healthy, I don't
no.
think.
No. Okay. To move more back to a more positive direction, tell me about some of the experiences you've had on your travels. Some of the you must have met some incredible people and had some
Yeah,
awesome
insane.
conversations.
Yeah, yeah, you know, like the Pantanal in Brazil, looking at talking to a farmer who had had his sheep killed by a jaguar and he'd locked him in a barn at night, and you know things like that. That it just like, how do you even end up in this situation where you're having these conversations?
Yeah.
Um,
Wow.
I made, I went to a farm, an organic farm in Canada, and they didn't want to work on a Sunday, which I think is amazing. But I was like, well, it's not really Sunday to me. It's not like really any day. I'm here for a month. So I cut their hay, and then after 4 days, had done the whole process and filled their barn full of hay, which is quite like, you
Yeah.
know, things like that. They're like really enriching experiences.
Yeah.
You know, visiting Mr. McCain in Canada, and yeah, New Zealand was my most recent trip, and I loved the lack of. I've used this carefully because there is class. I love the lack of class within land ownership. And, you know, sat in a kitchen of someone I'd consider a mate now who owns like 26,000 acres, and you're just having a beer and a yarn and a kind of
Yeah.
talk about life versus how that might be here was a really quite cool sort of environment to be in. But also, I don't know whether it's enough. I think it's Nuffield to some degree. It gives you access to these people. The way I describe it is, if someone's done your due diligence on you that you're not a complete idiot. So you don't have to do that when you speak to people or go and stay with their families, or because someone's already done that work, right?
Mm,
And that only hinges on the fact that people who do Nuffields have to do it well. And I'm quite vocal about this. You know, if people start doing it badly or start being idiots, then actually that value decreases.
yeah.
Um, but yeah, people are like, you know, people will just get their budgets out, or people will like have their kids sitting on your lap, or like they're very extremes, but they're for me they're really quite like relevant things. So the highlight definitely has just been getting to know people and being in that family environment. You know, in I think in Canada for a month I stayed in a hotel for 6 nights, and in New Zealand 3 nights. You know, out of a month each. That's quite it's intense, but
Yeah.
it's pretty wicked. Um, but yeah, there were I I was like no, I wasn't organized. I think I just got lucky in that there was no like major disasters, um, which would make good stories, I guess. But I just sort of winged it and went with it. And it was weird. You talk about imposter syndrome, or certainly being out of my comfort zone, you know, never traveling outside of Europe, I rely on my wife to book restaurants because I don't like necessarily speaking to people on the phone. You
I
know,
mean,
to go
that's what
to
I
go,
do. I'm
yeah,
exactly the same.
yeah, to go and do all of that
Yeah,
was pretty mind blowing, actually. Yeah.
yeah. People, people often say, and I've spoken to lots of people for the podcast and just in regular conversations that Nuffield has kind of changed their life, or it's been a big catalyst moment for change, or
Yeah,
I feel like maybe you were already on that direction, though.
and
Nuffield's maybe just
actually,
propelled you.
as an observation, and I don't necessarily believe this to be completely true, but as an observation, I think people who get the most out of Nuffield are probably either questioning what they're doing or feel like
Yeah.
there may be something more to it.
Mm.
Um, but equally, it throws up like way too many questions, or certainly has done for me. It can make things really, really complicated, and you
Mm.
question even why you're doing what you do, or even why you're doing it in the place you're choosing to do it.
Mm.
You know, it can question your sort of whole culture and those things if you're allowed to do so. Um, but absolutely changed my life. You know, in terms of broader view, even if like now I know about like global economics, well, I wouldn't have even considered that for our farming business before. But actually, fundamentally, if you don't consider these, or if you're not considering these things, you're probably not as strong as what you could be.
Mm.
Um, so yeah, it it's also again made me really question what is important in life. If we talk about real life change, like, and so we swing from this like, do we do something really good with it and really push the boundaries, or actually should we just be at home making sure our kids are the best possible people that they can be and having a nice life? You
Mm.
know, these are the things that kind of when you're driving in a car for 6 hours, this is the kind of nonsense that goes through your head because
It
you
is.
have it allows you the time to think about these things.
Yeah. Yeah, no, definitely. Yeah, when are you presenting your findings of your report?
In Aberdeen in November.
Oh wow, okay. So you've got
And
have you
I'm meant to be doing a report now, but we've actually got an event here as part of Nuffield in July, so I'll do my report after that. Um, but writing is not my natural place. Presenting actually isn't, although I feel like on the day I'm confident enough to wing it. So let's hope that it's good enough by then. Yeah.
I'm sure it'll be very entertaining. Tell us about the event at the farm in July.
Yeah, so we've got it's titled Generation Regeneration, the same as, but really it was so we're getting a group of young people on the farm from hopefully diverse backgrounds. Hopefully it's been put out to like OFC Breaking Barriers and Emergent Generation and McDonald's Progressive Young Farmers, like groups like that. Um, Essentially a kind of deep dive in what it looks like to get a farm tenancy in the basis that we've only been here 6 months. It's almost like a blank canvas to some
Mm.
degree. So I want to get people here and be like, what do you want to, what would you do with it? And but also take them through the harsh reality of the figures and actually what it costs. You know, those
Mm.
things that they might not be considering, like insurances or you know all of those things that we have to do.
Yeah.
Um, so it's a kind of deep dive into what they would do, kind of a case study. Um, but also with the fully open idea. Like if somebody came to me with a really good idea, or if they hadn't thought of something, I am the sort of person that'd be like, "You show me the figures that you think that'll make it work, and you can come and do it."
Mm.
You know, we want to encourage those kind of opportunities. So yeah, that's what we're doing the week after Groundswell. If anyone wants to come along, yeah.
That's really exciting. And you're presumably will your landlord be there as well? Are they kind of
Yeah,
get
they'll hopefully they'll pop along and have a chat with some folk. Yeah.
that's really because most landlords aren't that progressive.
Oh
That
no, they're and
that's
these
that's
guys here are really interested, looking at it for the long
yeah,
term.
that's really
Um, yeah, taking a lot of our
refreshing is the word.
conversation on board. Yeah, it is really refreshing. We actually had we did 2 days of farm work walks last week for the estate rather than just this farm, but incorporated this farm, and it was all about that conversation. And actually, got a really lovely email through from a couple who know about very much about farming, and they said how refreshing that kind of mindset is
Mm.
between the relationship between a tenant and a landlord. It's really cool, and it's
Yeah.
not to be kind of taken for granted as well.
No.
Um, and there is what's so the growing part of my consultancy is around this stuff, and it's the stuff that I really love. Now it is mostly word of mouth, but it's there are there are people buying farms and estates who are not necessarily from farming, but they're also not necessarily from old
Hmm.
like farming money, if that makes sense. And I think a lot of them have a different view on what they want their estate to be, whether
Yeah.
it's for their family or what. So what's really cool now is I'm getting into this world where people go, well, actually, that's the most exciting is find us a farm that you think is appropriate, that has a nice place to live, and then find us somebody to run it and do the things that you talk about as being really positive, and hopefully for a while a bit of remote management. Although I really believe that when I'm not needed is kind of when we've won. um, but like, how cool is that? That some of these ideas are now being like trickled out
Mm.
further. And if you think of the opportunity presented within that to people who might not have had an opportunity before, and again, broadening some of these conversations about what that looks like, it's to me that's pretty cool. And that's the stuff that I'm particularly excited by, because coming back to the farming thing, like this event here, we're absolutely not making any money off it. You tend not to make money off these things, but comes to that discussion of like what is enough and what is our value. Like we know we can be satisfied through helping others, but we also need money to live. So there's this kind of these balances of what you do with these holdings, I guess. And I know that there'll be loads of farmers who think it's nonsense because we're not getting the biggest yield out of wheat, although let's see, because we're doing quite a lot of fun stuff there. But those kind of conversations of, that I had a comment from a local of we're giving five acres over to a market garden, and they were like, well, that's 30 more sheep, and I'm like, well, I mean it is, but let's look at, for me, the value of that is very different, if that makes
Yeah.
sense.
Yeah, it's finding your why and your
Yeah.
purpose, isn't it? And I sometimes think that um I sometimes think that we've fallen into the trap as an industry where we think as individual farmers it's our responsibility to feed the world and we're responsible for food
Hmm.
security. And I think as an individual farmer, and if anyone disagrees, that's absolutely fine. But I think my responsibility is to feed my family and run my
Sure.
business, and
Sure.
that's it. I don't feel a responsibility for national food security. That's the politician's
No.
job, and I don't think that's good for individual farmers to fall into that trap.
No, I do, I agree with you. There's a few things on that. One of the main reason we took this farm on was for the good of our kids.
Yeah.
And when people come here and we say we've got this opportunity for you to have your own enterprise, they'll quite often ask why we're doing it. And
Mm.
actually, quite often my first answer is because, market garden, we want to feed our kids from our land, but we
Yeah.
don't have the time or the skill to do it. So there are those quite like base things to it, and that translates into community. But I can also tell you that one of my biggest struggles with this conversation is when I've been in Brazil where they're getting two crops a year, or I've been in Canada where they're growing like huge hectarage of wheat very well. Some of those moments I was like, what, why am I planting this 9 acre
Mm.
field of wheat? Like, why am I doing it?
Yeah.
And I don't think, again, no, people can disagree with me. I'm very happy for them to do so. We are in a globalized food system, whether people like it or not.
Hmm.
And some people can absolutely do things better than we can. And actually, I get a bit annoyed with this kind of like, we are better than them at this. And it doesn't matter what product it is or who them are, we are better than them. And it's
Yeah.
nonsense. If you actually
Yeah.
went and looked at like some of the advances or some of the efficiencies, or how people are doing certain things, it's not a great argument just to be
No.
like, our produce is better than them.
No.
And I do believe we need to be producing stuff in the UK. I do believe that food is high importance. But look at what we're actually eating versus what we're actually growing. And yeah, I just think that this conversation's a bit muddied. So, like I do with some of a lot of the things I think about, I'm just trying to turn it on its head. And if we can get a diverse crew of guys here growing really cool stuff, get people seeing it, maybe in the long run, that ripple effect might change people's buying habits, or it might give them an idea about what they can grow at home, or what actually they require a farmer to grow, or So yeah, I'm certainly not shouting about it. I'm just trying to do it. I'm trying to do it in another way that I feel is appropriate,
Yeah,
basically.
yeah, absolutely. So have you got a fixed idea of what you want the farm to look like? Well, I guess you haven't. That's a bit of a, after what we've just been talking about, it's a bit of a daft question, but
Yeah,
I suppose is what in those 15 years, have you got a vision for how the farm will look? Not a fixed idea, but just a kind of
yeah, really good question. Yes, we've worked on this a bit. I've stolen this through from a couple of other places, but um, something greater than the sum of its parts, if that makes sense.
okay.
We want it to be a really diverse, beautiful landscape that is better than it is now, which
Mm,
actually won't be hard in that respect because of the way it's been farmed. Um, and we want our kids to grow up in a really nice environment. Ellie and I absolutely know we're at our best when it's us together, if that
hmm
makes sense. So we're trying to find ways that we can make that happen. But we want it to be respected in the community. We want to have a little shop here that feeds people, and you know, all of these things are slightly ideologies, probably, but it doesn't mean that that can't happen if
Yeah.
that respect. And also coming from a place of it has to be a business versus some of these ideologies are based on the fact that you've got loads of money and you just want to help people. Well, we don't have that bit.
Yeah.
We have the mindset, but we don't have the finance. So it has to work. So yeah, in 15 years time, if all of these, if even if some people have come and gone and gone on to better things or realize that they can achieve what they want to achieve, or yeah, that's it really. Like be productive, of course, um, but something more than that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome. Okay. Um, let's finish this off with the traditional hard-hitting questions.
Hmm.
Um, what's the best gig you've ever been to?
Yeah, really clear one for me, and for ridiculous reasons. But it was a Razorlight gig in Bristol, in a venue that smelt like toilets, and we walked in and thought it was going to be like the worst thing, and it was just Ellie and I, and I mean we did get a bit pissed, but it was literally like the most fun
Yeah.
kind of. Yeah, it wasn't big, it wasn't amazing, and we've gone to lots of big gigs and stuff, but it was just like super fun, no expectation. Ellie was like super happy and smiley. I think she does fancy Johnny Brell, but that's another. But it was like it wasn't one of the kind of big shows, or there was no pretense to it. It was just like super fun. Yeah, so
Yeah.
that would be that one.
Sometimes those are the best ones.
Yeah.
What's the best piece of advice you've ever been given?
Yeah, I actually this changed. One of them I definitely can't tell you on the podcast, but this changed
You
as
can
like
tell me that at Groundswell.
yeah, I'll
Tell,
tell you that at Groundswell. Yeah,
yeah.
the this changed sort of throughout my life actually, but the only one that sort of like stuck with me fully through everything is that sweat is better than regret.
Oh, I haven't heard that. I like that.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
it was told me by someone who was definitely a different thinker to everyone I knew at the time. But that kind of idea that some things are hard, and that actually there's lots of times you're like, oh, I don't really want to do that, but you'll often regret not doing it. And I don't mean the regret of like heavy life regret that I should have done this or I shouldn't have done that, but they're just kind of like in the moment. Oh yeah, maybe I could have been there doing that. So I think sometimes putting that bit of extra effort in gets you somewhere.
That's really cool. I've written it down so that I can add it to my list of dad things to tell my teenage daughters. They'll love that. They'll thank you for that, Dad. What's the best book you've ever read? So of all
Yeah,
those books, when you
of
were
all
reading a
those
book a
books,
week,
yeah, and actually a real human look on an eye opener. There's a book called Gypsy Boy by Mickey Walsh, and it's a very easy read. Um, and the content maybe potentially be irrelevant to lots, but it's a kind of a questioning of and I didn't know it when I read it that this is what it meant, but I understand it now. It's that real questioning of like culture and what's wrong or right, and
yeah,
somebody prepared to kind of step outside that. And I think I remember exactly where I read it. It was actually like a real turning point for me in some of my
Mm.
thinking and some of my kind of being like, oh yeah, maybe I will question some of this nonsense that I'm surrounded by. Yeah.
Yeah, those are the best books that make you do that, though, aren't they? There's a
Mm.
sort of a handful of books maybe you read in your life, I think, that just kind of yeah, you just they stick with you, don't they?
Mm. Sure.
If you could meet any historical figure, who would it be and why?
Yeah, again, I struggle. Well, I didn't struggle with this. I'd like to think things differently. Um, so there's two parts to this. One is the historical figure would be Jethro Tull, of who invented the seed drill.
Yeah,
The only reason that is because it is literally the only, and this is genuine, the only thing that I remember from school. In a history lesson, it is the only name out of all of the people I'd learned about that I could actually tell you. And I don't think it has anything to do with farming. It just so happens that I remember it.
it's quite a
Um,
memorable name though, as well, isn't it? Which helps.
sure, and the
Yeah.
fact that he did loads for agriculture, apparently. Now,
Mm.
this is the bit that I was really interested in: is all of these people. What I don't really want to know. Loads of people list historical figures. I don't really want to know what they did. I want to know what kind of person that they were.
Mm.
So I struggled with it. Like, people could name lots of people, but what I want to do is go back in time and find out if they were actually a decent person and the reasons that they did what they did
Hmm.
versus what they actually did. And the reason I ask that is because I'm concerned in the world we live in now, who will be an historical figure.
Yeah.
And bearing in mind, we've got like people famous because they're sleeping with 1,000 men in a day, or because or
Yeah.
because of what they're doing on social media, they've become a big name
Mm.
that may be influencing people, and that's really what historically people of importance were influencers
Yeah.
generally,
Yeah.
although under a different term. And there are loads of people doing really amazing stuff at the moment as well. Don't get me wrong, but who do we remember and who do we hold in like high esteem? And at the moment, some of this stuff is particularly troubling to me, to be honest with you.
Yeah, I know what you mean about that. Funnily enough, I read an article about this not long ago about how the potential of AI to change history as well. Even just the way that events that have happened can virtually be erased from the internet, and yeah, it's kind of all quite dystopian. But
And one of the things we talk about as a couple is acting now like future ancestors, which I don't
yeah,
know they're sort of a concept people kind of
yeah,
think about. But again, like, are these people, what are they acting like, and what influence are they going to have down the line? And yeah, so that's
yeah.
a very long-winded answer of I don't
No,
actually really know because I want to know what they're like. I don't, was Napoleon actually a bit of an asshole? Like, that's what I want to know, though. That's the kind of yeah.
yeah, yeah. I'm sure he probably was, but yeah. Anyway,
And does that matter?
no,
If we look at America, like
yeah, yeah,
that's a hard thing to have an opinion on, and
it
that will
is.
he will absolutely go down as a historical figure for the good or the bad.
Mm,
But what kind of person is he? Now we get a view into that,
yeah,
but
yeah.
I want that view of all of these greats. It will take me a long time to meet them all, but all of these pretty supposedly epic people from previous, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Okay.
So
Lastly then, what's your all-time favorite song?
yeah, every time, don't even have to think about this. The River by Bruce Springsteen is my like absolute go-to for any moment.
That's the best answer I've ever had on this entire podcast. Done. I'm a Springsteen
Yeah.
obsessive. Yeah, it's the opening lines, isn't it? Because the opening lines are kind of my life. They
Hmm.
uh, come from down in the valley where Mister,
Yeah.
when you're young,
Yeah.
they bring you up to do what your daddy done. That's
and
me.
and I think it's so relatable to our industry, but it's so
Yeah,
relatable to like so many things, and
yeah, yeah,
it's yeah. Ellie almost cries at the kind of at the opening of it. It's that it has a real like power to it, but
it
or it
does.
does for us anyway. Yeah,
It does. What a great
yeah.
answer. Dan, it's been awesome to speak to you. It's one of the joys about this podcast is you I speak to a lot of people that I know a bit for the podcast,
Hmm.
but when you actually get down to sit for and talk for over an hour and
Sure.
have a deep dive into their lives, it's such it's a genuine privilege. I love it. it's one of my favorite things I do. So yeah, been
Sure. And
brilliant to speak to you.
keep doing what you're doing. You're when we talked earlier about like social media and stuff, don't underestimate. I talk about these ripples, like being a farmer and a dad who values taking their girls to rugby training and those things. Don't underestimate that, and actually talking about some of these things out loud. I think it's really important. So yeah, keep doing what you're doing.
Just we're all doing our best. That's yeah, brilliant to speak to you, and to everyone at home, thanks for listening, and hope to see you next time. I've been Will Evans. This has been Rock and Roll Farming. Thank you and good night.